Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Colonel Frank Colley. We warmly welcome the family of Gunner John William Crane, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to acknowledge the parliamentary delegation from Timor-Leste. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's first World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Gunner John Crane. Popularly known as Jack, John William Crane was born on the 5th of May 1917 in Nanango, Queensland, to Edwin and Lily Crane. The Crane family had moved to Australia from England in the years before John's birth, coming to reside in Nanango, where John worked as a farmhand. On the 24th of June 1941, John and his older brother Albert enlisted together in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force at Maryborough. After spending time in training at Enoggera, on the 10th of January 1942, the brothers left from Sydney for overseas service. After travelling through Singapore, they arrived in Batavia, present-day Jakarta, in early February and marched into Johor to be taken on strength of the 2nd 15th Field Regiment. By the start of 1942, the Japanese had advanced through Thailand and most of Malaya. The regiment's gunners were in almost constant action, providing artillery support for the infantry withdrawal along the Malayan Peninsula towards Singapore. The Japanese, meanwhile, were preparing their forces for the invasion of the island. The attack on Singapore began at 10:30 p.m. on 8 February, when 2 Japanese divisions crossed the Johor Strait and attacked along the front of the 22nd Brigade. The brigade and the 2nd 15th inflicted heavy casualties on the attackers, and the artillery sank some barges. But with communications cut, heavily outnumbered, and the Japanese infiltrating between positions, the brigade and the 2nd 15th withdrew. The regiment continued to move back towards Singapore, providing artillery support when needed. By the 13th of February, the battle for Singapore Island was all but over. And on the 15th of February, British forces surrendered. 2 days later, the Crane Brothers Regiment began moving into the sprawling Changi prisoner of war camp. After a few months in Changi, the Crane Brothers were allocated to F Force, one of the last Labor forces to leave in mid-April of 1943, consisting of 3,662 Australians and 3,400 British. F Force's hardships began when they were sent to Thailand by train, packed into suffocating metal railway trucks with little food and water. On reaching Bang Pong in Thailand, the prisoners were marched over 300 kilometres to half a dozen camps, progressing towards the Burma border. To avoid the heat, which was at its most intense in April, the prisoners marched at night for as much as 12 to 15 hours. When the monsoonal rains began in May, paths became impossibly slippery and treacherous. Many of the men collapsed and had to drop out. The bulk of F Force arrived utterly exhausted in mid-May at remote and primitive camps, where acute supply problems aggravated widespread outbreaks of cholera, dysentery, malaria, beriberi, and diarrhoea. Many men, particularly the British, were unwell even before they left. Isolated in upcountry Thailand, remote from food and medical supplies, and drenched by monsoonal rains, a third of the Australians and almost two-thirds of the British prisoners died. It wasn't until 1945 that the Crane family received news that John had died of cholera on the 25th of May, 1943. His brother Albert died of dysentery 7 months later. The graves of those who died during the construction and maintenance of the Thai-Burma Railway were later transferred from camp burial grounds and isolated sites along the railway into cemeteries in Thailand and Burma. Today, John Crane's body lies in Tenbaizu Wayat War Cemetery, at the foot of the hills which separate Burma from Thailand, under the words, "His duty fearlessly and nobly done, ever remembered." He was 26 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His portrait is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Gunner John William Crane, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.